Hey everybody, this is Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. This week we are continuing last week's video on canceling, and this week we're going to talk more about personal boundaries and what does it look like to cancel someone from our lives. Is it something that we do for our health, or is it something that we do that creates their own echo chamber? A couple of definitions first to make this make sense. Echo chamber would be essentially when you are the only voice that is being reflected back to you. So all of the people who speak into your life, all of the places you get your news from and you get your information from, they all mimic your values and your personal convictions. That can be a dangerous place to be. It can also be a very comfortable place to be. And I'm not equating comfort to danger, but there is some similarity there. We'll put that aside for a minute and we'll talk about personal boundaries. Boundaries are difficult for people to talk about and for people to really understand, specifically when it comes to deciding who does and does not get to speak into your life. There are two variants of boundaries that I want to talk about with you today, and those are mental boundaries and emotional boundaries. Let's start off with mental. Mental boundaries are the boundaries between you and someone else that guides what you think and what your values are and what your opinions are on certain things. Some signs of not great mental boundaries are things like if someone is highly suggestible, if something sounds plausible, you usually follow into it and feel like it's true. If you're in a conversation with someone and they have an opposing viewpoint, how long into their presenting of their viewpoint and the reasons why they feel the way they do you stop listening and start cultivating your rebuttal? If it's pretty soon in, if it's halfway through, if it's 3/4 of the way through, if it's really anything before they're done talking, that's indicative of some fairly unhealthy mental boundaries. If you had a healthy mental boundary in that situation, hearing someone else's opposing viewpoint and thoughts on something would not be threatening to you and would not be destructive to your own opinion on something. Another aspect of healthy mental boundaries is how far into hearing an opposing viewpoint do you grow rigid and stop listening. So it's not even just about starting to cultivate your response and your argument or interrupting someone when they're presenting their information. It's about growing rigid and no longer being able to accept someone else's stance on something. Emotional boundaries is the other part of this, and that's the thing that's going to cause a couple of you a little bit of frustration. So stick with me, because the things that you're feeling, the emotions that are coming up for you when I talk about this, are very indicative of where your boundaries actually are. So your emotional boundaries are your ability to separate your emotions and responsibility for them from other people. Having bad emotional boundaries are the things that lead us to give advice, to cut someone off during an argument, to feel guilty about someone else's emotions and their emotional state. Having poor emotional boundaries tends to do that. Now, if someone asks you for advice, that's a different situation. But if someone comes to you just sharing information with you and you automatically go into advice mode and you tell them what to do in their situation to get out of it, that's indicative of your own incorrect emotional boundaries. Having good emotional boundaries can stop you from feeling guilty about someone else's pain. One of my pet peeves, personally, has always been when someone says, they made me cry. They didn't make you cry. They didn't reach into your eyeballs and pull out your tears and drip them down your face. They didn't make you cry. You were affected by something that they did to the level that that's where your emotions went. Okay. And that's not to say that you're responsible for every way that everyone responds to you, but it does allow you to have the responsibility of your own emotions and not carry the guilt for someone else's. As the bearer of information, it is on me to make sure that you understand this in the best way I can. But once I've put this out there, I have no control over what you do with it. There's a video on my channel and somebody commented on it, and I had a little bit of back and forth with them, and it's all still there if you want to see it, but it grew to be apparent that the person had not actually watched the video and instead was responding to the hashtags that I had on the video. And it was an interesting conversation because in reality, I went into the conversation just trying to help this person understand what I was trying to do. And the more I listened to them, the easier it was to get down to what really the problem was. And once we were at that problem, our conversation took a totally different direction. Because I did not have an agenda going into the conversation, I didn't want to correct them. I wasn't looking to battle it out with them about why they were wrong. I was just looking to understand what they were trying to say. That's a healthy emotional boundary. An unhealthy emotional boundary would be when someone who you have muted on Facebook comes back up again. You're like, oh, 30 days is up. That's super fun. And all of a sudden you feel anger, you feel the heat of frustration, you roll your eyes at everything they're posting, you're reading into the things that they're posting. That is a sign of someone who has breached your emotional boundaries, or it is a sign of you not having good emotional boundaries in the first place. Which one of those is accurate is really your call. You're the one who's living your life, and you're the one who knows. Now, the real point of this video is to really try to delineate between when is it drawing a healthy boundary to remove someone from your life, and when is it creating an echo chamber. And you're not going to like my answer, because my answer is depends on who you are. But the things that everybody should keep in mind before blocking someone, before canceling someone or something out of their life is this something that inappropriately breaches my boundaries? And if it does, you should be able to identify what it is that breaches them. If I could take, for example, I'm trying to think of an example that's not going to just throw people under the bus. The example from my last video, I'll put it up here again, the person who wanted to burn me at the stake. The thing that breached my boundaries here is that my opinion was tantamount to something worth killing me over. And I felt like there's some physical and mental and emotional boundaries being breached there. And so I feel like it was okay for me to no longer converse with this person. Let's take an example that most of you can probably understand. If there's someone in your life who you have a real personal relationship with, you do not always agree on the things that they say or the viewpoints that they have, but as a person, you have come to respect and care about them. If you see them posting certain things on social media and there are things that get you amped, you have a couple of options. You can mute them, you can hide it, you can unfriend or unfollow them, or you can remove them from your life. So what do we do when we're faced with the decision of, do I block this person? You need to decide, is what is happening right now triggering to me because I am expressing poor emotional or mental boundaries? Or is it because this person's viewpoint is not one that I can allow in my life in order to have those emotional and mental boundaries? So I knew when this video was requested by a couple of different people, this was going to be something that I was going to say, I don't really have an answer for, and I kind of don't. Your first obligation is to be true to who you are. And if being true to who you are does not allow you to have other voices in your life, then it doesn't let you have other voices in your life. But you have to understand the consequences of that means that what you are giving back out to the world is one-sided and not always applicable to everyone. If you choose to have many diverse voices in your life, your understanding of things is going to be more diverse, obviously. It is also going to be harder for you to come to conclusions about things because there are so many things to consider. That can feel very overwhelming. An important thing to remember right now is that your choices on who to keep in your life and who to not keep in your life are not always going to be the most sound choices. All of our abilities to make choices in our lives is highly suspect right now. You have heard me say this before, and I will say this again and again and again, and hope that somebody hears me. We are living in trauma. Our society as a whole is living in a trauma. When we are living in trauma, your trauma brain processes new information, new ideas, and new people as threats. When you go into an interaction with someone, assuming they are a threat, you are less likely to hear them. You are less likely to be honest about your own place in things. You're just less likely to get something out of that interaction. The reason it's important to understand that is because currently, the way things are, maybe it's better to mute people right now than to make decisions to remove people from your life when you are in a state that is not your typical state. I want to say one more thing, and I want to say this to specifically spiritual leaders, people who are raised in the church, people who interact regularly with a Christian community. This is a rampant issue in Christian communities. We teach kids from very little to flee the enemy, flee anything that is sinful, look to what is good. And we teach them that with the expectation that you fill your life with good and you have good, and you fill your life with God and you have God, and all of that. And that all makes a lot of sense for children. We never teach people how to stop that as adults. And they instantly flee from things that don't make sense to them. For me, it is not a threat to have a conversation with someone who has a different viewpoint than I do when it comes to spirituality or the existence or lack of existence of God. It's not a threat to me to have that conversation because I know what I know, but also I'm secure enough to take what I know and put it aside and share the experience with somebody else because they could have something to teach me. That doesn't mean what I know is wrong or bad or terrible or evil. It means there's a different viewpoint to enter into and to understand. There is so much depth to truth. When we experience truth as linear, we do it a disservice. The only way that you know if you're entering into a situation where your emotional or mental boundaries are being breached in a positive or negative way is to put yourself in those situations. Again, I want you to remember that we are all in this group trauma right now, and putting yourself in those new situations might not be entirely beneficial to you at this point. If that is the case, don't do it. Please don't do it. Care for yourself. I was asked to comment on a current situation that was happening within the group, and I said, I am not going to comment on that right now because my emotional and mental boundaries aren't great. And I'm concerned that I'm going to make it either more about me than it needs to be, or I'm going to make it more emotional than it needs to be. I'm not able to be clear-headed about it, and so I'm not going to comment on that. And that comment was understood by some people and completely misinterpreted by others. What their thoughts are and how their thoughts come at me do not determine my worth or my thoughts or my emotions. They just don't. So the way that you know whether or not you're creating your own echo chamber or whether or not you are removing people from your life for your own mental health is how far into your boundaries have they gone. That is going to mean some exploring of your own boundaries. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this was helpful for you. Drop something in the comments or hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. And I will see you next time. Have a good one.